A young widow staggered through the Montana snow with a blanket under one arm and a leather notebook pressed beneath her coat, while three figures watched from the cabin she had been forced to leave behind. She did not look back when another man appeared near the fence line, stretching a measuring rope toward the dark limestone ridge. The wind sharpened. Snow began covering her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. She climbed toward a narrow black opening beneath the rock and disappeared inside. Hours later, her hands were bleeding from hauling stone. A crude wall was rising across the entrance. Then she opened the notebook. Between faded sketches of chimneys and masonry heaters was a survey line she had never noticed before. Her fingers stopped. The boundary curved around the limestone ridge. Outside, far below, the same stranger was still measuring, and now he was looking directly toward the hollow where she stood. The first snow found Edith Whitmore before she had a roof. It came sideways across the flat willow basin, thin as sharp against her cheeks, carrying the particular cruelty of a season that had arrived 2 weeks ahead of any calendar. Behind her stood the homestead where she had slept for 7 years. Ahead of her stood a gray limestone ridge with one black opening beneath its shoulder, narrow as a wound in the rock. Edith carried one wool blanket, a tin coffee pot, a hatchet, $40 sewn inside the lining of her coat, a canvas sack holding dried beans, a smaller pouch of cornmeal, a handful of salt wrapped in cloth, 6 matches in a tin box. She carried one more thing. A leather-bound notebook small enough to fit inside a breast pocket, filled with her dead father's handwriting in faded pencil. She had not opened it in years. The men who had put her outside believed she would be back before dark. Vernon's oldest boy had even left the barn door unlatched, the way someone might leave a gate open for a dog expected to return on its own. Edith did not turn around. She walked north toward the ridge with the snow pushing against her left side, her boots breaking through a crust of ice that had formed overnight across the brown grass. Each step made a sound like paper tearing. 3 days earlier, her husband's older brother, Harlan Whitmore, had arrived from the east with 2 loaded wagons, a wife named Delia, 2 small children, a folded land claim in his coat pocket. Edith's husband, Thomas, had been dead since spring. A rolling freight wagon near Miles City had crushed him beneath its rear axle while he walked alongside it checking a loose tie rope. The claim to the homestead had never been properly transferred into Edith's name. Thomas had always meant to ride to the county seat. He never rode. Harlan knew it. He had known it before he loaded those wagons. By noon of his arrival, Delia was placing dishes inside Edith's cupboard. The children were sitting on Edith's bed. Harlan stood in the doorway with his arms folded across his chest, filling the frame the way Thomas never had. Thomas had been the thinner brother, the quieter one, the one who listened before he moved. Harlan was none of those things. "You can stay until the weather clears," he had told her. His voice carried the particular softness of a man who had already won but wanted the losing side to feel grateful. Edith had looked through the window. Outside, near the horse corral, a man she did not recognize was stretching a length of rope between 2 wooden stakes driven into the frozen ground. He moved with the careful precision of someone measuring, not building. He wore a black coat too fine for ranch work. His boots had never touched a stirrup. "Who is that?" Harlan glanced toward the window. "Cleet Purdy, landman from Helena. Help me locate the claim paperwork." Edith watched Purdy pull the rope taut, sight along it with one eye closed, then drive another stake near the corner of the property. He was not measuring the homestead. He was measuring the land beyond it, the open ground running north toward the limestone ridge. The ground nobody had bothered to fence because it held no grass worth cutting. "The weather is clear now," Edith said. Harlan rubbed his jaw. The gesture was identical to Thomas's. For a moment, the dead brother stood in the living brother's body, rubbing his jaw the same way he always had when he wanted to say something kind but could not find the shape of it. Then Harlan spoke. Thomas vanished. "You know what I mean." Edith folded her wool blanket. She folded it the way her mother had taught her, pressing the creases flat with the heel of her palm. "Yes, I do." She left before anyone could decide to dress what they were doing in the language of charity. If there was one thing worth remembering about the frontier, it was this: the people who took from you always expected you to be polite about the loss. They wanted the transaction to feel clean. They wanted you to shake hands with the knife still in your ribs. Edith had watched her father lose a stone contract in Pennsylvania the same way. A handshake, a regret, a suggestion that he should be reasonable. Her father had picked up his tools, loaded his cart, found the next job. He never spoke about the men who had cheated him. He spoke about the next wall he intended to build. Edith intended to build something too. She did not yet know what. The opening in the limestone ridge was not a deep cave. It was a broad, hollow cut beneath an overhang, perhaps 20 feet across, 12 feet deep, shaped like the inside of a cupped hand laid sideways. Edith stepped inside. The wind stopped touching her face. That single fact changed the arithmetic of survival more than any fire could. She removed one glove, pressed her bare palm against the rear wall. The limestone was cold, but not the cold of the air outside. It carried the slow, patient temperature of ground that had spent all summer absorbing warmth through hundreds of feet of rock, storing it beyond the reach of any wind that had ever crossed Montana territory. Edith crouched. She studied the floor, dry. No puddles, no mud, no sign of standing water at any point during the year. Then the ceiling. No fresh water stains, no mineral streaks left by dripping. Then the opening, south-facing. By afternoon, winter sunlight would strike deep inside the hollow. A north-facing cave would have been a tomb. This one was something else entirely. She set down her blanket. This will do. Her own voice sounded strange against the stone. It came back to her with a faint delay, as though the rock needed a moment to decide whether it agreed. She spent the rest of the first day gathering dead cottonwood from the creek bottom below the ridge. Every trip cost her nearly half an hour. Trail was steep, loose with frost-broken shale, treacherous in the fading light. She dragged branches uphill until the muscles in her shoulders began to jump beneath her coat. Small involuntary spasms that felt like something inside her body trying to get her attention. She did not burn the wood. Not yet. A person who burned fuel before having a way to hold its heat was feeding the sky. Her father had said that once while standing in a half-finished stone cellar in Pennsylvania, watching a neighbor's chimney throw sparks into a December night. The neighbor burned 3 cords of oak that winter. Her father burned 1 cord of the same wood in a cellar wrapped with 18 inches of field stone. Both families survived. One of them had enough wood left to cook through March. The other did not. Instead of burning, Edith used the last daylight to collect flat limestone from the slope below the cave. She stacked the stones across part of the cave mouth. One course, then another. The wall did not need to close the opening completely. It needed to break the wind, shrink the entrance, create where space ill air could exist. Moving air stole heat. Still air held it. The difference between those two facts was the difference between freezing to death in your sleep or waking up stiff but alive. By dusk, the wall stood barely knee-high. Edith sat behind it with her back against the rear limestone, eating cold beans from the tin with a wooden spoon. Snow hissed across the exposed rock outside, a sound like fat rendering in a dry pan. The homestead chimney was visible far across the basin. Smoke rose from it in a thick, dark column that bent south in the wind. Harlan was burning plenty of wood. Edith counted the column's thickness against the sky. 1 wagon load of split timber might last his family a week if temperature stayed mild. Less if real cold arrived. Montana winters did not negotiate. She looked at her own pile of dead branches stacked beneath the overhang. Then she looked at the stones surrounding her. She had a different problem to solve, one that Harlan would never understand because he believed survival began with fire. Edith's father had taught her that survival began with containment. Fire was the second step. The first step was build something that refused to let warmth leave. That night, she wrapped herself in the blanket, pulled her coat tight, slept with her boots on. Near midnight, she woke because something felt wrong. She sat up. The small fire she had finally allowed herself 3 sticks, barely enough to heat a cup of water, had gone out. Yet her breath was not pouring white in front of her face. Inside a cabin with a dead stove, her breath would already be visible. Here the air felt different. Not warm, but not the killing cold of the open basin. Edith crawled toward the opening. The air beyond the low stone wall cut through her clothes at once. She could feel the temperature drop against her forearms like stepping into creek water. Inside, behind the wall, the difference pressed against her skin. She returned to the rear wall, placed both hands flat against the limestone. The rock had absorbed some warmth from the afternoon sun striking the south-facing opening. Not much, but the stone had kept what it received. It was not generous with heat. It was miserly, the way a good banker was miserly with gold. It gave nothing back to the wind. It held every degree behind 6 feet of dense calcium carbonate laid down by ancient seas that had covered this territory long before any human being had walked across it. Edith remained there with both palms pressed against stone until her fingers warmed. Her father's voice came back to her clearly for the first time in years. Not the words at first, but the sound. The low, careful way he explained things, as though every piece of knowledge was a tool that could cut you if you held it wrong. Wood gives heat away fast. Earth keeps what it gets. She had been 8 years old when he first said those words. She had not understood them. She had not needed to. Now they were all she had. Before sunrise, she was working again. She narrowed the entrance, stacking stone courses higher, fitting each rock tightly against its neighbor, pressing creek clay into the joints between them. Then she dug a shallow drainage trench so melting snow could not run toward her sleeping place. By midday, blood had dried in 2 cracks across her knuckles. She wrapped them with strips torn from the bottom of her petticoat, a garment she had sewn herself 2 summers ago from cloth bought at the trading post in Roundup. The cloth was sturdy. It held. She continued stacking stone. The next problem was harder. Fire. An ordinary fireplace would send most of its heat straight upward through the chimney. Every cabin on the Flat Willow used this design, borrowed from a century of American building tradition that valued speed over efficiency. A man could build a stone fireplace in 2 days. He would then spend the entire winter cutting wood to feed it, because 70% of the heat produced by his fire left through the chimney before it could warm the room. Edith remembered her father complaining about exactly this, standing in a neighbor's kitchen near Pittsburgh, while the neighbor fed log after log into a fireplace wide enough for a child to stand inside. Her father had once shown her something different, an old masonry heater built by a bricklayer who had settled near the Allegheny River. The principle was not complicated, the execution was brilliant. The fire burned hard, fast, hot inside a small firebox. Smoke traveled through a series of turns inside a thick body of brick before reaching the chimney. Each turn forced the hot gases to touch more brick surface. The bricks absorbed the heat. Hours later, long after the flames had died, the room stayed warm. The bricklayer had heated his entire house with 1 fire per day while his neighbors burned 4. Edith stared at the limestone beside her. She had stone, she had clay along the creek. She had time, though the darkening sky to the north suggested that time was running shorter than she wanted to believe. She pulled the leather notebook from inside her coat. The cover was stiff, cracked along the spine. Her father's handwriting filled the first 30 pages with notes about foundation depths, mortar mixtures, drainage angles. She turned past those. Near the middle, she found what she was looking for. A rough pencil sketch of a masonry heater, drawn from memory after her father had studied the bricklayer's design near Pittsburgh. The firebox was small, rectangular. 2 channels ran from it through the body of the heater, each turning at right angles before meeting a vertical chimney passage at the rear. Beneath the sketch, her father had written in his careful hand, flat stone base, 6 courses, channel width, 2 fingers apart, never narrower. Edith traced the letters with her fingertip. The pencil had faded in places. The word never remained dark, pressed hard into the paper, as though her father had wanted the page itself to remember what his daughter might forget. She turned the page. On the next sheet, something else caught her eye. Not a drawing. A list of numbers, coordinates written in a different ink. Beside them, in her father's hand, survey marks Whitmore Claim NW Quarter Section 14 T12N R27E, recorded Meager County, 1876. Below the numbers, a rough boundary line drawn in pencil. The line ran from the creek across the basin north past the homestead, then continued up the slope to include the entire limestone ridge. Edith stared at the page. She had never seen it before. Her father had died in the winter of 1878, 5 years before Thomas. He had never mentioned recording survey marks. He had never mentioned that the original claim filed before Thomas took over the homestead included the ridge. If this was accurate, the cave she was sitting inside belonged to the Whitmore claim. The claim that Harlan held with an improperly transferred piece of paper. The claim that Cleet Purdy had been measuring with his fine black coat stretched across the frozen ground. Edith closed the notebook. She did not know whether a handwritten copy of survey marks held any legal weight. She did not know whether the original record still existed at the county land office. She knew only that the numbers were in her father's handwriting, the same hand that had written never in capital letters beneath a drawing of smoke channels. Her father did not write things he did not mean. She put the notebook back inside her coat. Then she picked up the next stone. On the 4th morning, she began building the heater base. She chose the flattest rocks, fitted them as tightly as the rough limestone allowed, chinked every gap with clay mixed from creek mud, dry grass, fine stone dust pounded with the back of the hatchet. The mixture smelled like rain on a dirt road. It dried pale gray in the cold air. Her first firebox collapsed before noon. The sidewall buckled outward where a wedge-shaped stone had shifted under the weight of the course above it. The structure folded on itself with a grinding sound that seemed too loud for something so small. Edith looked at the broken stones for several seconds. She did not curse. She did not sit down. She pulled the stones apart, cleaned the clay from their surfaces, sorted them by thickness, began again. The second firebox held. She built the first smoke channel above it, angling the passage to the right, then turning it back to the left, following her father's sketch as closely as the irregular limestone would permit. Each stone had to be tested, turned, tested again before she committed it to the wall with clay. Some fit, most did not. She rejected 3 stones for every one she kept. Late that afternoon, a horse appeared on the trail below the ridge. Edith heard the hoofbeats before she saw the rider. She reached for the hatchet, held it against her leg where her skirt covered the blade. The rider stopped beneath the cave. He was a broad man near 50, wrapped in a buffalo coat so large it covered the back of his saddle. Snow clung to his hat brim in a white crescent. His eyes moved from Edith to the stone wall across the entrance, then to the clay-covered structure rising inside the cave. "You living in there?" Edith kept the hatchet beside her thigh. "I'm building in here." The man studied the heater base with the expression of someone who recognized labor even when he did not recognize its purpose. He looked toward the northern sky. A dark bank of cloud had begun swallowing the snowy mountains along the horizon, eating them from the top downward as though the range were sinking into gray water. "My name's Silas Finn. I keep cattle 6 miles east on Flat Willow Creek." Edith said nothing. Silas pointed toward the clouds. "Army station at Fort McGinnis got a wire this morning. Hard front crossed the divide yesterday. Came through the Sun River country faster than anything the Signal Corps has seen in 4 years." Edith looked past him. The light had changed. The western snowfields that had glowed white all morning were no longer bright. They had gone flat, the color of old pewter. The change had happened while she worked. She had not noticed. How long? Maybe 2 days. He studied the unfinished entrance wall, the gap where 3 more courses of stone needed to stand. Maybe less. Edith turned toward the half-built heater. The clay in the upper channel was still wet. Her woodpile was too small by half. The cave mouth remained partly open, wide enough for wind to enter without resistance. Silas shifted in the saddle. His horse stamped once, steam rising from its nostrils. "I've got an empty bunkhouse, roof solid stoveworks. My daughter Josie could use the company. Been just the 2 of us since her mother passed." The way he said it matter of fact, no weight placed on the grief, the information offered the way a man might mention the location of a water hole, told Edith more about Silas Fenn than any introduction could. He understood loss. He also understood that loss did not entitle a person to stop building. Edith picked up another stone. "Thank you. You coming?" She fitted the stone into the heater base, pressed clay around its edges with her thumb. The clay was cold. It resisted her, then yielded. No, Silas remained there another moment. His eyes moved once more across the cave, the wall, the heater, the small pile of dead cottonwood, the single blanket folded near the rear wall. He was doing arithmetic. Edith could see it in his face. He was calculating whether she had enough of anything to survive what was coming. The answer on his face was no. He did not say it all right. He touched his hat brim. Then he turned his horse downhill. The hoofbeats faded into the sound of wind moving through dry sage. Edith waited until the sound disappeared completely. Then she removed her coat, rolled her sleeves above her elbows despite the cold, reached for the next stone. Outside, the wind changed direction. It had blown from the west all morning. Now it came from the north. The temperature began to fall. Edith could feel it against her bare forearms, a tightening of the skin, a contraction of the small blood vessels beneath the surface. Her body was pulling warmth inward, away from the extremities, protecting the center. The same principle as the cave, the same principle as the heater. Hold what you have, give nothing to the wind. She worked through sunset. She worked past the point where her hands cramped around every stone. She built the second smoke channel wider than the first, remembering never narrower, checking the gap with 2 fingers held apart the way her father's sketch showed. The channel had to be wide enough for hot gases to pass without resistance, but narrow enough to force contact with the surrounding stone. Too wide, the heat rushed through without transferring. Too narrow, the draft choked, smoke backed up into the room. The heater became a hazard instead of a salvation. Near dark, she tested the firebox. She placed 3 thin sticks of dry cottonwood inside, struck a match. One of her 6 touched the flame to a curl of bark. The sticks caught. A small fire climbed. Edith watched the smoke. It rose from the firebox into the first channel. It moved through the turn, then it slowed. A thin gray thread pushed back toward the firebox opening, curling outward into the cave like a question mark made of ash. Edith killed the flame immediately, smothering it with a handful of dirt. The draft was wrong. Smoke was returning instead of continuing through the second channel. She sat back on her heels, hands on her knees, staring at the stone structure she had spent 2 days building. Outside, the sky had darkened to the color of iron. Snow began falling again, not the thin sideways snow of the previous days, but thick vertical flakes that dropped straight down through still air, the kind of snow that preceded something much worse. Edith crawled behind the heater. She pressed her face close to the narrow channel she had built the previous night. Her father's voice came back in pieces. Not words at first, hands. The way he had held 2 fingers apart when explaining smoke passages. The way he had tapped the side of the old heater near Pittsburgh, his knuckles rapping against warm brick, his voice low with admiration for the man who had built it. Hot air moves where pressure allows it to move. Block the path, the air finds another way out. Usually back towards you. Edith found the mistake. The second channel narrowed too sharply where 2 irregular stones leaned inward, reducing the passage to barely 1 finger's width. The gap was half what it should have been. She stared at it. The error was small, a matter of 2 inches. 2 inches that would fill her cave with smoke every time she lit a fire. To fix it, she would have to remove nearly half the upper course. A full morning of work, perhaps more. She had built the channel with care, each stone seated in clay, each joint pressed tight. Dismantling it meant cracking those joints, cleaning the stones, reshaping the passage, rebuilding. She stood, looked at the sky, looked at the falling snow, looked at the heater. A full morning of work. She might not have a full morning left. Edith pulled the first stone. It resisted, held by dried clay. She struck the joint with the heel of her palm. The stone shifted. She pulled again. It came free. She set it aside, reached for the second. The clay crumbled around it. She worked faster than precision wanted, faster than her father would have approved, but the clouds to the north were no longer clouds. They were a wall, a solid gray mass pressing down over the basin like a lid being lowered onto a pot. She rebuilt the channel wider. 2 full fingers across, she checked it 3 times, sliding her hand through the passage to feel for any narrowing. Smooth, open, consistent. The clay was wet, barely set. Under normal circumstances, she would have waited a full day before testing. She did not have a full day. She struck the second match. The bark caught. Flame climbed the thin sticks. Smoke rose into the first channel, disappeared. Edith held her breath. She watched the junction where the first channel turned into the second. Smoke entered the wider passage. It did not slow. It did not return. It moved through the turn, rose into the vertical chimney channel at the rear of the structure, vanished upward through a gap in the limestone ceiling where a natural fissure carried it to the surface above. Edith waited. The fire strengthened. No smoke came back. She moved closer. A faint pull could be felt near the firebox opening, the draft drawing air inward, feeding the flame. The sound was quiet, almost like breathing through a narrow crack. Steady, rhythmic, alive. She placed her palm against the outer stone of the heater. Nothing yet. She fed the fire another stick. Then another. The flame grew. 20 minutes passed. The limestone beneath her hand began to change. Not hot, warm. A warmth that felt less like fire than like the memory of summer pressed into rock. Edith kept her palm there. Something moved through her jaw, not a sound, not a word, a small involuntary tightening that she did not allow to become anything more. She turned away from the heater, though there was nobody inside the cave to see her face. The feeling that moved through her was not pride. It was something older than pride. It was the recognition that her father's knowledge had survived his death, traveled through a faded notebook, passed through her hands into stone, become heat. The dead could still keep you warm if they had taught you well enough. The first burn lasted 40 minutes. She let the fire die before the wet clay joints could crack under excessive heat. Then she sat beside the stone mass, placed both hands against its surface, waited. 1 hour later, warmth still radiated from the heater wall. 2 hours later, the warmth remained, faint but present. The stone was not letting go. The proof was working. But the storm had not yet shown its full intention. That became clear after midnight. Edith had fallen asleep beside the heater, her blanket pulled over her shoulders, the hatchet within reach. She woke to a sound that filled the canyon the way water fills a glass completely, leaving no room for anything else. Wind. Not the steady wind she had grown accustomed to. This was a different animal entirely. It came in surges, each one louder than the last, each one carrying a freight of snow that struck the stone entrance wall with the sound of gravel thrown against the barn door. The buffalo hide she had hung across the narrowed opening snapped inward like a sail catching a sudden gust. Cold air spilled across the floor. Edith threw off the blanket, caught the hide with both hands, pushed it back against the opening. Snow had packed against the lower wall, forcing itself through every seam, every gap between stones where the clay had not yet fully hardened. White powder sifted across the floor in thin lines, each one marking a failure in her construction, each one a draft that would steal heat from the interior. She shoved a timber brace across the doorway, a dead cottonwood limb she had kept for this purpose, though she had hoped not to need it so soon. She drove stones against the bottom of the hide, wedging them into the gap between earth-stone wall. The wind struck again. The entire entrance shuddered. Edith stood with both hands on the brace, her boots braced against the floor, her weight thrown forward against the pressure. The wall held. She waited through another gust, then another. The third came harder than the first two, a sustained blast that lasted longer than she could hold a breath. Dust dropped from the cave ceiling. Edith looked upward. A crack ran across the limestone above her sleeping place. She had noticed it when she first entered the cave, a hairline fracture in the rock, old, mineral stained, seemingly stable. Now snow dust sifted from it like flour through a sieve. Edith grabbed her blanket, dragged it toward the heater. She had barely cleared the spot when a chunk of limestone the size of a dinner plate separated from the ceiling fell shattered against the floor, exactly where her head had been resting. The sound echoed through the cave. Stone fragments skittered across the packed earth. Edith stared at the broken pieces. The largest one had a sharp edge that could have opened a skull. She pulled her bedroll tight against the heater. The stone mass was still warm from the evening's burn. She pressed her back against it, drew the blanket over her legs, held the hatchet across her lap. Sleep was no longer possible. The storm had found a second way to test the shelter, attacking from above where she could not build a wall against it. Morning never truly arrived. The cave simply became less dark. A gray luminescence filtered through the gaps in the hide entrance, enough to see the interior but not enough to call daylight. The storm continued without pause, a constant pressure against every surface of rock. Edith fired the heater again. This burn was hotter. She fed 6 pounds of split wood into the firebox, allowed the flames to race, watched the smoke disappear cleanly into the channels. Within an hour, the outer stone had become warm enough that she could sit beside it without her coat. She hung a tin cup of water near the entrance. Within 20 minutes, a skin of ice formed across the surface. She moved the same cup beside the heater. The ice disappeared. That simple demonstration told her more than any thermometer could have. The distance between freezing to death or surviving with dignity could be measured in 6 feet of cave floor. She ate a small portion of dried beans, a piece of hard bread from the bottom of her sack. Then she counted the wood. 3 days, perhaps 4 if she burned carefully, if she stretched each firing cycle to its maximum, if she sealed every remaining draft in the entrance wall. 4 days, the storm outside showed no sign of weakening. If anything, it was settling, the way a heavy animal settles on the ground it intends to occupy. Edith looked toward the entrance. Through a gap above the hide, she could see nothing except white. Not the white of snow falling. The white of snow filling the air so completely that the concept of distance had ceased to exist. There was no basin, no ridge, no creek, no homesteads, no chimney, no Harlan, no Cleet Purdy measuring dirt he believed he could own. There was only the inside of the cave, the warm stone under her hand, the sound of wind meeting rock, the certainty that whatever happened next would happen here. She spent the rest of the morning sealing the entrance. She hung her spare wool skirt along the inner side of the stone wall, creating a second barrier. She packed dry grass into the deepest seams where cold air whistled through. She rolled the blanket during the daylight hours, pressing it against the lowest draft beneath the hide. Every small leak she closed meant another stick of wood she would not have to burn. Every stick she saved bought another hour of warmth. Every hour of warmth was a decision the storm could not make for her. By afternoon, the cave had transformed. The heater gave slow, steady warmth from one side. The earth beneath the floor held its own modest temperature. The limestone walls, south-facing, had absorbed whatever sunlight managed to penetrate the storm clouds, storing it the way they had stored summer warmth for thousands of years, before any human being had thought to take shelter beneath them. The air inside was still, not warm by any standard Edith would have chosen, but livable, defensible. She sat on the packed earth floor with her back against the heater. No roaring fire, no constant chopping, no desperate feeding of flame. Only the low sound of wind beyond the wall, muffled now by stone, hide, wool, grass, the accumulated weight of everything she had built in 4 days with raw hands, a hatchet, creek clay. Edith opened the notebook to the survey page. She read the numbers again. Section 14, Township 12 North, Range 27 East. The boundary line her father had drawn encompassed the homestead, the creek bottom, the cottonwood grove, the ridge, the cave, everything Harlan had taken, everything Cleet Purdy intended to claim. She did not know what the numbers meant in a courtroom. She did not know whether Judge Orrin Hatch at the county land office would recognize her father's handwriting as evidence of anything. She knew only that her father had written these numbers in the same notebook where he had drawn the masonry heater, where he had written never in dark pencil, where every piece of knowledge was recorded with the same careful precision. Her father did not guess. Her father measured. She closed the notebook, put it back inside her coat against her chest where her heartbeat pressed against the leather cover. Then she listened. The storm breathed against the stone. The heater ticked faintly as cooling clay contracted against warm rock. Somewhere far below, the creek ran beneath ice, carrying meltwater from mountains she could not see toward rivers she had never visited. Edith was alone in a cave in Montana Territory in the winter of 1883, with enough food for 6 days, enough wood for 4, enough knowledge to survive if the storm gave her the chance. She was also in possession of a piece of paper that might prove the land beneath her was already hers. Might prove it. The word might was the most dangerous word on the frontier. It kept people walking toward places they should have turned away from. It kept people hoping when hope was a luxury they could not afford. It also kept people alive when every reasonable calculation said they should already be dead. The wind hit the entrance again. The hide snapped inward. The timber brace groaned. Edith placed one hand against the warm stone of the heater, the other against the cold stone of the cave wall. She sat between two temperatures, two futures, two versions of what the next week might bring. In one, the storm broke early. The road opened. She reached the county seat with her father's notebook. The survey numbers held. In the other, the storm buried the basin. The wood ran out. The heater cooled. She became another name that people mentioned once in spring before forgetting. She did not know which version was coming. She knew only that the stone beneath her right hand was warm because she had built something that held heat the way her father had taught her. That was not hope. That was evidence. Outside, the blizzard tightened its grip on the flat willow basin. Snow climbed against the entrance wall. The temperature continued falling. Somewhere across the white distance, the homestead chimney sent its dark column of smoke into the storm, burning through Harlan's wood supply at a rate that would leave the stove cold long before the road opened. Edith could not see it. She did not need to. She knew the mathematics of a fireplace. She knew how fast a cabin lost heat through log walls, through window gaps, through a chimney designed to pull warmth out of a room as efficiently as it pulled smoke. She also knew, with the particular certainty of someone who had been thrown out of her own house by people who believed she had nowhere to go, that the moment would come when the mathematics of the cabin would fail, when the wood box beside Harlan's stove would empty, when the fire would die, when the cold would enter the homestead the way it entered every building that had been designed to fight it with flame, instead of containing it with stone. That moment was coming. Edith could feel it the way she could feel the storm's pressure against the entrance wall. Not yet, but soon she removed her hand from the warm stone. She placed it against the cold wall. Then she pulled the blanket tighter, closed her eyes against the sound of the storm, allowed herself to rest. Not sleep, rest. The difference mattered. Sleep was surrender, rest was preparation. Edith Whitmore was preparing for something she could not yet name. Inside a shelter made of lessons, her father had pressed into a notebook with the weight of a man who understood that his daughter might someday need to build her life out of stone because the people around her had taken everything else. The storm continued. The heater held its warmth, the entrance held its shape, the cave held its builder. Outside, Montana territory kept falling. The storm did not arrive in stages. It arrived the way a door closes. One moment the basin existed beyond the cave mouth. The next moment it did not. Edith woke to a sound she had never heard before. A sustained roar that seemed to come from inside the rock itself, as though the limestone ridge had begun vibrating at a frequency too low for the ear to separate from the body's own pulse. She pressed her hand against the cave floor. The ground trembled. Not an earthquake. Wind, hitting the cliff face with enough force to shake loose stone from the overhang above. She checked the entrance first. Snow had climbed another foot against the outer wall during the hours she had rested. The buffalo hide bulged inward between the timber braces, pregnant with pressure, its surface coated with fine ice crystals that glittered in the thin gray light leaking through the upper gap. Edith placed both hands against the hide. Cold radiated through it the way warmth radiated through the heater wall, only reversed. The storm was a furnace running backward, producing cold the way a fire produced warmth, pouring it against every surface it could reach. She checked the heater. The outer stone retained warmth from the previous burn, enough to keep the interior above freezing, not enough to remove the need for her coat. She fed 4 sticks into the firebox, struck the third of her 6 matches, watched the flame catch. Smoke rose cleanly through the channels. The draft pulled steady. Whatever snow had accumulated above the chimney fissure overnight had not yet sealed the exit. Yet, that word carried weight she did not want to examine. Edith ate a handful of cornmeal mixed with water, cold because she could not spare the wood to heat it. The texture was gritty, paste-like, the kind of meal that filled the stomach without rewarding it. She chewed slowly, making each mouthful last, giving her jaw something to do besides clench against the sound of the storm. By what she estimated was mid-morning, though the light never changed enough to confirm it, the wind shifted from sustained pressure to something worse, gusts. Each one hit the entrance wall like a fist striking a table. Between them, silence. The silence was harder to endure than the noise because it carried anticipation. Edith found herself bracing before each impact, her shoulders tightening, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket. The body prepared for blows it could hear coming. It spent energy on preparation that produced nothing except exhaustion. She forced herself to stop listening. She turned her attention to the heater instead, running her fingers along the clay joints, checking for cracks where the heat cycling might have weakened the bond between stone surfaces. 2 joints near the top of the firebox had separated slightly. She mixed fresh clay from her dwindling supply, pressed it into the gaps, smoothed the surface with her thumb. The work calmed her hands. Her hands calmed the rest of her. Near noon, the roar outside changed pitch. It rose, sharpened, became a whistle that entered the cave through the air channel she had carved near the top of the entrance wall. The channel she needed for ventilation. The channel that was now acting as a wind instrument, producing a single sustained note that filled the cave the way a voice fills a church. Edith stuffed a wad of dry grass into the opening. The whistle stopped. So did the fresh air. She removed the grass. The whistle returned. She tore a strip from her petticoat, folded it twice, wedged it loosely into the channel. The fabric reduced the opening enough to break the wind's voice without sealing the passage completely. Air still moved through the weave of the cloth, slower, colder but present. That was the negotiation. Every decision inside the cave required her to trade one necessity against another. Heat against ventilation, light against insulation, food against energy, wood against time. The storm permitted no generosity. It charged interest on every comfort. She was calculating her next burn cycle, how long to wait, how much wood to use, how far she could push the cooling period before the interior temperature dropped below the threshold where her body would begin spending more energy staying warm than the food could replace. When she heard something beneath the wind, a voice. Edith stood. The sound vanished inside the next gust. She waited through the silence that followed, then it came again. Not words, a shout. The kind of sound a human throat makes when it has been shouting for a long time, when the vocal cords have thickened with cold, when the mouth can no longer shape language into anything more precise than noise. She pulled the hide aside. White filled the opening. Snow drove horizontally across the gap, so thick it looked solid, a wall of moving ice. Nothing could be seen beyond the reach of her arm. The shout came a third time, closer, below the ridge. Edith cupped both hands around her mouth. Here. The wind took the word, shredded it, scattered the pieces across the basin. She drew a deeper breath. Here. A dark shape materialized below the slope. Then a second shape behind it, larger, four-legged. A horse. The first shape moved with the lurching, uneven gait of someone carrying weight. Edith recognized the buffalo coat before she recognized the man inside it, Silas Fenn. Ice covered his beard in a white crust that made his face look carved from the same limestone as the ridge. He was half-dragging a smaller figure through the snow. The figure's boots scraped against the ground, leaving shallow trenches that the wind filled almost instantly. My daughter. The words came out broken, the consonants lost to cold. She was bringing supper to the Northline shack when this hit. Edith ran down the slope. The wind nearly took her off her feet on the third step. She dropped low, grabbed Silas's arm, took the girl's other side. Together, they carried her up the trail. The girl's head hung forward, chin against her chest. Her hat was gone. Red hair stuck to her forehead in wet strands, dark with ice. She weighed less than Edith expected. The kind of lightness that came from a body pulling inward, shutting down its edges, retreating toward the center the way a fire retreats to its last coal. They brought her through the entrance. Edith dropped the hide. Silas lowered the girl beside the heater. His hands were shaking, his entire body was shaking. The buffalo coat had protected his core, but his face, his hands, his knees, where the snow had soaked through those, belonged to a man who had spent the last hour inside something that wanted to kill him. Edith knelt beside the girl, 17. Narrow shoulders. Her wool coat had stiffened with ice until it crackled when Edith touched it. The girl's lips had gone the color of tallow. One glove was missing. The exposed hand was white, the fingers curled inward like the petals of a flower closing for the night. How long was she outside? Silas pulled his hat off. Ice fell from the brim. 3 hours, maybe more. I found her a mile south of the shack. Horse went down in a drift. She tried walking. Edith cut the frozen stocking from the girl's right foot using the edge of the hatchet blade. The skin beneath looked pale, hard, the texture of candle wax. No blood color visible beneath the surface. Silas reached for his daughter's ankle. Edith caught his wrist. Her grip was firm enough that he stopped. Not yet, she needs warmth, she needs it slowly. Silas looked toward the heater. Its outer stone radiated a gentle heat that could be felt from 3 feet away. Too close, too fast, we do more harm than the cold did. Edith wrapped the girl's feet in dry wool strips torn from the blanket's edge. She positioned her several feet from the warm stone, close enough to benefit from the ambient temperature of the cave interior, but far enough that the heater's direct warmth could not reach damaged tissue before blood flow returned on its own. Then she covered her with the blanket. Silas removed his buffalo coat, laid it over the girl. For a moment, standing in the cave without his coat, he looked smaller, older, the size of a man's grief rather than the size of his body. Edith heated water in the tin cup. Not over a fire, she could not afford the wood. She held the cup against the heater's outer stone until the water reached the temperature of a warm bath. She soaked cloth strips in it, placed them beneath the girl's arms, along her sides, against the hollow of her throat where the blood ran closest to the surface. Each compress would cool quickly. She replaced them. Again, the process was slow, patient, repetitive. It required nothing except attention paid at the right intervals. Silas watched every movement. Did you learn? My father worked stone crews in Pennsylvania. Winter crews. 3 men died of cold the year I was 12. That teaches you frozen feet? It teaches you to listen when older men explain why someone died. One of the crew bosses told my father that the men who survived frostbite were the ones who warmed slowly. The ones who shoved their feet into hot water lost the feet entirely. Heat returning too fast to frozen tissue destroys what the cold preserved. Silas looked at his daughter. The girl's breathing had shifted. Shallow, rapid breaths had given way to something deeper, slower. Her chest rose, held, fell with the rhythm of someone whose body had decided to continue operating. Then her fingers moved. The one that had lost his glove, twitched against the buffalo coat. Silas leaned forward. Josie, her eyelids opened halfway. The pupils were dilated, dark, unfocused. They moved across the ceiling of the cave without fixing on anything. Then they found Silas. "That's Pa?" His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension that had held his body rigid since he came through the entrance released in a single exhalation that fogged the air between them. "Yes." Josie's gaze traveled from her father's face to the stone walls, the heater, the entrance wall, the hide stretched across the opening. She looked at Edith. "Where are we?" "Somewhere warm," Silas said. Edith looked toward the entrance. Snow was forcing through the seams again, thin white lines appearing along the base of the hide. The timber brace had begun to bow under the sustained pressure. For now. Those 2 words settled into the cave the way cold settled into a room when the fire died. Quietly. Completely. Impossible to ignore once they arrived. The shelter was no longer being asked to keep one person alive. 3 bodies occupied a space designed by one woman for one woman. 3 bodies that needed heat, air, water, food. 3 bodies that produced warmth. The human furnace ran at roughly the temperature of a low coal fire, but also produced moisture through breathing, through sweat, through the simple biological fact of being alive inside an enclosed space. Moisture meant condensation on stone surfaces. Condensation meant water running down walls, pooling on the floor, creating the kind of damp that stole heat from clothing, from blankets, from skin. Edith wiped the nearest wall with a dry cloth. The cloth came away wet. She wrung it out, hung it near the heater to dry. Then she wiped the next section. The work was tedious, unglamorous, the kind of maintenance that survival demanded but stories rarely mentioned. Nobody sat around a fire in spring telling tales about the woman who wiped condensation off cave walls. They told stories about the blizzard, the rescue, the dramatic moment. They forgot the hours between dramatic moments, the hours that actually determined whether anyone lived to see the next one. Josie slept through the afternoon. Her color improved slowly, the gray pallor giving way to something that resembled the pink of living tissue rather than the white of preserved meat. Edith checked her feet every hour. The right foot remained concerning, the toes had not yet returned to their normal color. The skin stayed hard across the ball of the foot, but the left showed improvement. Sensation was returning. Josie winced in her sleep when Edith pressed gently against the sole. Pain was good. Pain meant nerves still functioning. Silence meant they had stopped. Silas sat against the wall with his knees drawn up, watching his daughter the way a man watches a candle flame in a room he cannot afford to let go dark. He had not spoken much since Josie woke. The relief of hearing her voice had drained something from him, some reservoir of emergency strength that had carried him through the ride across the basin, through the search for the cave, through the climb up the ridge with his daughter's weight pulling against his shoulder. "Your wife," Edith said. She did not make it a question. She made it a door that Silas could walk through or leave closed. He left it closed for nearly a minute, then Lenora. 3 winters ago. Josie was 14. Edith nodded. She did not offer sympathy. Sympathy was a currency that lost value the more it was spent. She offered something else instead. "My husband died in spring. My father 5 years before that. The men in my life had a habit of leaving before they finished what they started." Silas looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not amusement, not pity, something closer to recognition. The expression of a person who had just heard their own experience described in someone else's vocabulary. "Lenora could shoe a mule," he said. The sentence arrived without context, without connection to anything that had come before it. It carried the weight of something he had been waiting to tell someone for 3 years. She didn't look like the kind of woman who could shoe a mule. She looked like the kind of woman who arranged wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. She did that too. But she could shoe a mule faster than my ranch hand. She simply preferred not to tell people. She said a woman who advertised her strength, spent half her life proving it to men who didn't want to believe her. Edith placed another compress along Josie's side. "Your wife understood the cost of being capable. She understood most things before I did." The storm hit the entrance with a gust that shook loose clay from the upper joints of the wall. Both of them looked toward the hide. It held. They looked back at each other. Nothing more needed to be said about Lenora Fenn. The conversation had served its purpose. It had established that Silas understood what it meant to lose someone whose competence you had depended upon without fully recognizing. It had established that Edith understood what it meant to carry knowledge inherited from the dead into a world that had not asked for it. Near dusk, or what Edith estimated was dusk, the light having shifted from gray to a darker gray, Josie sat up on her own. She pulled the buffalo coat around her shoulders, looked at the heater, looked at the entrance wall. Her eyes moved with the sharp attention of someone cataloging her surroundings, filing each detail into a mental inventory. Her father's eyes, Edith noticed. The same quick horizontal sweep, the same pause on structural elements. You built this. Edith stirred the beans she was warming in the tin cup against the heater stone. Yes, the heater too? My father designed it. I built the object. Josie extended her hands toward the warm stone. The fingers of her right hand remained stiff, slow to close, but they moved. Pa said you were living in a cave. He didn't say you turned it into a house. A house is whatever keeps the weather on the correct side of the wall. Late that evening, Silas told Edith something that changed the shape of the days ahead. He said it quietly, between gusts, while Josie dozed against the warm stone. Before the storm hit, I was in roundup for supplies. Saw Cleet Purdy at the land office. He filed a mineral claim on the limestone ridge 2 days ago. Filed it under his own name. Said the ridge wasn't part of any existing homestead patent. Edith's hands stopped moving. She had been sealing a draft seam near the base of the entrance wall, pressing grass into a gap between 2 stones. Her fingers remained inside the gap, motionless against cold rock. He told the clerk the ridge was unclaimed public land. The clerk accepted the filing. If nobody contests it within 60 days, the claim becomes valid. Edith withdrew her hands from the wall. She sat back on her heels. How many days since he filed? 4, maybe 5. Counting today. 55 days, perhaps 56. The number existed at the edge of possibility, the way the far side of a river existed when you stood on the near bank without a bridge. Visible. Uneachable until something changed. She pulled the notebook from inside her coat, opened it to the survey page, held it toward Silas. He took it carefully, the way a man accustomed to handling livestock held something fragile. He tilted the page toward the heater's glow. My father recorded the original survey marks for our claim. The boundary includes the ridge. Silas studied the numbers. His lips moved as he read the coordinates. This is a handwritten copy, yes. The original record would be at the county land office, at Judge Hatch's office, if it still exists. Silas closed the notebook, handed it back. Orrin Hatch is an honest man. I've dealt with him on water rights. He keeps careful records. Can he be reached before the 60 days expire? Silas looked toward the entrance. Beyond the hide, the storm answered the question more clearly than he could. Not until this breaks. The information Silas had delivered sat inside the cave alongside the 3 of them, occupying space the way a 4th person would, demanding resources, attention, worry. Cleet Purdy had not simply measured the land, he had filed on it. The legal machinery was already moving, grinding forward at the pace of bureaucratic time, indifferent to the storm, indifferent to the woman sitting inside the very rock that a man in a fine black coat intended to own. She could not fight the filing from inside a cave. She could not reach the county land office through a blizzard that had erased the roads. She could only survive long enough for the roads to reappear, then move faster than the calendar would naturally allow. Edith picked up the grass she had been using to seal the draft. She pushed it into the gap, pressed it flat, covered it with clay. The leak stopped. One problem solved. Others remained. The second day of the storm broke with no improvement. Snow had buried the entrance wall to within 18 inches of the top. Each hour, the weight of accumulated snow pressed inward with greater force, compressing the hide, bowing the timber braces, testing every joint Edith had built. She checked the braces at intervals she measured by burn cycles. Every time she lit the heater, she inspected the entrance. The main brace had developed a visible curve, bending inward at its center like a bow under tension. Silas saw it during one of these inspections. That wasn't bent like that yesterday. No, he stood. What do you need? She handed him the hatchet. Cut that dead branch into 2 braces, the thick one near the back wall. He took the hatchet without questions. No discussion about whether the work was necessary. No suggestion that perhaps they should wait. He cut. Edith directed placement. They wedged one timber diagonally from the packed floor to the upper frame of the doorway. The second went against the lower retaining wall, braced at an angle that distributed the snow's pressure across the widest possible surface. The next gust hit. The hide snapped inward. The new braces held. The original brace stopped bending. Silas ran his hand along the interior stone above the entrance. Your whole place built like this? Built for pressure? Edith pushed dry grass into another seam. A shelter starts with what the weather cannot easily take from you. He considered this. His hand remained on the stone. I spent 30 years believing a proper house started with logs. Lenora tried to tell me once that our cabin leaked heat faster than I could cut wood to replace it. I told her that's what wood piles were for. What did she say? She said wood piles were for men who refused to count. On the second morning, Josie discovered the notebook. Not by searching, Edith had left it on the stone shelf beside the food supplies. Josie picked it up while Edith was clearing snow from the ventilation channel with a stick. When Edith came back inside, Josie was sitting cross-legged beside the heater with the notebook open on her lap. She was reading the survey page. Section 14, Township 12 North, Range 27 East. Josie's voice was quiet, precise. She read the numbers the way someone reads numbers they understand. This is a General Land Office survey notation. Standard format. Edith stopped near the entrance. You can read that. Pa files water rights claims every spring. I help him with the paperwork. County uses the same survey grid. Josie traced the boundary line with her finger. Your father drew this. The boundary runs from the creek to the ridge. I know where it runs. Then you know this cave is inside the claim. Josie looked up. Her expression held something that had not been there the previous day. Focus. Purpose. The particular sharpness that appeared in a young person's face when they realized their knowledge applied to something larger than the context in which they had learned it. Cleet Purdy filed on land that's already claimed. If the original survey record matches this, his filing is void. Sicelus had been listening from the rear wall where he sat with his knees drawn up. That's a large if. Josie closed the notebook. Judge Hatch keeps survey records going back to territorial days. If this notation is accurate, the record exists. The question is whether anyone can reach his office before Purdy's claim cures. Edith took the notebook from Josie's hands, not roughly, but firmly. The way a person reclaims something that belongs to them. The question before that one is whether anyone can survive the next 3 days. The correction reoriented the room. Josie looked toward the entrance. The wind was accelerating again, each gust arriving faster than the last, the intervals between them shrinking. Silas shifted his weight against the wall. The wood situation demanded Edith's full attention by the second afternoon. She counted every piece remaining beneath the overhang. 14 sticks of various thickness, 6 split sections of cottonwood trunk, a handful of bark strips useful for starting fires but not sustaining them. She calculated at the current burn rate 1 firing cycle every 4 hours. Each cycle consuming roughly 2 pounds of wood, the supply would last approximately 2 days. Perhaps 2 more if she extended the cooling period to 6 hours, allowing the interior temperature to drop further between burns, relying on 3 bodies' collective warmth to bridge the gap. 3 bodies. That was the variable the cave's original design had not included. Edith had built the heater for 1 person. The thermal mass of the stone was sized for a space occupied by a single body, producing a single body's worth of heat, moisture, carbon dioxide. 3 people tripled the biological output while the heater's capacity remained fixed. The cave stayed slightly warmer because 3 human furnaces burned inside it. It also stayed damper. The walls ran with moisture. The blanket felt heavy with absorbed humidity. Edith addressed the moisture by opening the ventilation channel wider during burn cycles, when the heater produced enough warmth to offset the cold air entering through the gap. She closed it tighter during cooling periods. The rhythm of opening-closing required constant attention. Too open too long, the cave chilled below recovery. Too closed too long, the air thickened with dampness until breathing felt like drinking. Josie watched these adjustments with the intensity of someone memorizing a procedure. She began anticipating the timing. By the second evening, she opened the ventilation channel before Edith reached for it, having judged the burn cycle's end by the sound of the draft changing pitch inside the firebox. The draft sang at a higher note when the fire burned hot. It dropped to a low murmur as the flames died. Josie learned to hear the difference. You're listening to the heater. Josie nodded. It sounds different when it's working right. Like breathing. Your ear is better than most. My mother used to say I heard things before they happened. She said it was because I never talked enough to drown out the world. Edith handed Josie a stick of wood. Feed the firebox. 2 pieces. No more. Josie placed the wood inside with the care of someone handling something precious. The flame caught. Smoke rose cleanly. Warmth began its slow migration into stone. Then, near midnight of the second day, something changed. Edith woke to a sound she could not immediately identify. Not the wind continued its assault on the entrance. Something else. A shift in the quality of the air inside the cave. She opened her eyes. The interior was darker than it should have been. The heater's last burn had died an hour ago, but typically a faint glow remained in the firebox, embers clinging to the last scraps of bark. No glow. The firebox was cold. She had not let it die. The fire had gone out on its own. Edith sat up. She reached for the bark strips, arranged them inside the firebox, struck her 4th match. The bark caught. The flame climbed. Smoke rose into the first channel, moved through the turn, entered the second channel, then stopped. It did not continue upward. Instead, it thickened, pooled at the junction between the second channel, the chimney passage. Then it reversed. A gray plume rolled back through the channel, spilled from the firebox opening, poured into the cave. Silas coughed. Josie pushed herself upright, pulling the buffalo coat over her nose. What happened? Edith smothered the flame with dirt. The smoke continued seeping from the heater for several seconds before thinning. She crouched beside the firebox, placed her hand near the chimney passage at the rear. No draft, no pull. The air inside the passage was dead, motionless, sealed. She looked toward the stone ceiling, the chimney fissure, the natural crack in the limestone that carried smoke from the heater to the surface above the ridge. Something had closed it. Snow. Edith stood. The chimney exit is buried. Silas followed her gaze upward. Can you clear it from inside? The fissure runs through 8 feet of solid rock. There's no access from in here. Then someone has to climb out. The three of them looked at the entrance. Beyond the hide, the storm hammered the cliff face with a violence that made the timber braces shudder with each gust. The chimney exit was above the cave on the east side of the ridge, a short climb in fair weather, perhaps 20 feet of steep limestone. In the current conditions, with wind strong enough to knock a standing person sideways, with snow packing every ledge, with visibility measured in arm lengths rather than distances, the climb was something else entirely. I'll go. Silas moved toward the entrance. Edith caught his arm. You don't know where the exit is. Show me. It's above the east side. The cliff ledge narrows to less than 2 feet. In this wind, one wrong step puts you in the canyon. Josie stared at her father. Silas looked at his daughter, then at Edith. The smoke still hung in the cave, a thin haze that irritated the eyes, thickened the air. Without the chimney, the heater was useless. Without the heater, 3 people in a cave with dwindling wood would be burning open fires, sending most of their heat through the entrance, consuming fuel at triple the current rate. The wood would last 1 day instead of 3. If that chimney stays closed, the heater is finished. Silas said it quietly, the way a man states a conclusion he has already accepted. Edith said nothing for several seconds. Because he was right. She pulled a length of rope from beneath the stone shelf, the same rope she had used to drag cottonwood branches uphill. She tied one end around Silas's waist, knotted it twice. She tied the other end around the largest interior brace, the diagonal timber wedged between the floor, the door frame. The exit is directly above the east face, 20 feet up, slightly left of the overhang. You'll feel a gap in the rock where warm air used to rise. Stay against the wall. Don't cross the open slope. The wind hits hardest from the north side. Silas pulled his coat tight. He took the hatchet from Edith's hand. If you lose the trail, follow the rope back. He nodded. Edith lifted the buffalo hide. Wind punched into the cave, carrying a horizontal sheet of snow that stung exposed skin like thrown gravel. Silas ducked his head, stepped through the opening. The white swallowed him within 3 strides. His shape dissolved into the storm, the way ink dissolves in moving water, first the outline, then the form, then nothing. Edith dropped the hide. She wrapped both hands around the rope where it ran from the brace, through the gap beneath the hide. The rope moved steadily for the first minute, feeding outward as Silas climbed. She could feel his weight on it, the slight rhythmic tension of a man pulling himself upward, using the rope as a guide rather than a support. Then the rope stopped moving. Edith waited. 5 seconds. 10. The rope remained taut but motionless, as though Silas had frozen in place on the cliff face. Silas, she shouted through the gap between the hide, the stone. The storm consumed his name the way it consumed everything immediately, completely, without acknowledgement. Josie tried to stand. Edith placed a hand on her shoulder, pressed her gently back toward the heater. Stay. The rope jerked, once hard, then again. Then it went slack, the tension releasing so suddenly that the coil inside the cave pooled on the floor like a dead snake. Edith pulled. The rope came freely, no resistance, no weight at the far end. She kept pulling. The end came through the gap beneath the hide. The knot that had been tied around Silas's waist was still intact. But the rope beyond it, the section that should have connected to Silas, had been cut, not untied. Cut. A sharp edge of rock on the cliff face had sawed through the fibers as the wind whipped the line against the limestone. Edith stared at the frayed end. Then she grabbed her coat. Josie looked at her from the blanket. What are you doing? Edith pulled the coat over her shoulders. She did not tie the remaining rope around herself. There was not enough length to reach the cliff face. The rope would serve no purpose except to anchor her to a brace she might need to move beyond. Instead, she memorized the entrance. She counted the steps from the hide to the edge of the overhang. She fixed the direction of the east face in her mind the way a sailor fixes a compass heading before entering fog. Bringing your father back, she lifted the hide. Beyond it, there was no trail, no rider, no cliff. Only moving white. Edith stepped into it, disappeared 3 paces from the door. The cold hit differently outside the cave. Inside cold was an absence, the absence of heat, the absence of warmth, a subtraction. Outside cold was a presence. It occupied the air the way a solid occupies space. It pressed against her face, her throat, her chest. It entered through every opening in her clothing, the collar, the cuffs, the gap between her skirt, her boots. Within 30 seconds, her fingers had begun to stiffen. She kept one hand against the limestone wall, moving sideways along the cliff face. The rock was wet with packed snow, slippery beneath her palm. Her boots found the ledge, a narrow shelf of stone that ran along the east face, barely 18 inches wide. With a drop she could not see but could feel in the way the wind rose from below, carrying the particular updraft of open space. Silas? Nothing? The wind shredded his name before it traveled 10 feet. She moved farther along the ledge. Her left hand maintained contact with the wall. Her right hand swept the air ahead of her, searching for obstacles, for Silas. for any solid object in the white void. Then her boot struck something soft. She dropped to one knee, a glove. Silas's glove, half buried in snow that had already begun covering it. She grabbed it, looked uphill. A shallow mark crossed the snow where a body had slid a furrow perhaps 6 inches deep, already filling with fresh snowfall but still visible as a depression in the otherwise uniform surface. Edith followed the furrow. 10 feet higher, she found Silas wedged between 2 limestone shelves that jutted from the cliff face like the pages of a half-open book. His hat was gone. One hand still gripped the hatchet, the knuckles white around the handle. The other hand was pressed against his left knee, holding it the way a man holds something that is broken. You hurt? Enough? Can you stand? I can complain standing up, then stand. Edith got beneath his arm, braced her legs against the slope. He rose with a sharp breath through his teeth, the sound of pain being processed without permission to become a shout. His left leg held weight but refused to bend. The knee had taken the impact of his fall against the limestone shelf, absorbing the force that should have been distributed across his entire body. Above them, the chimney opening was visible, a dark gap in the rock face, barely a foot across, packed solid with wind-driven snow. A faint warmth should have been rising from it, the residual heat of the cave below venting through the fissure. No warmth came. The snow had sealed it completely. Edith took the hatchet from Silas's hand. She climbed the last few feet on her hands, her knees, the limestone slick beneath her. She reached the opening, drove the hatchet blade into the packed snow, once, twice. Chunks broke away, fell into the fissure below. A thin stream of warm air rose from the gap, the first breath of the cave reaching the surface, proof that the passage still connected. She struck again, widening the opening. The packed snow resisted, dense as ice where the wind had compressed it. Each blow sent vibrations through the hatchet handle into her frozen hands. She could barely feel the impact. Her fingers operated on memory rather than sensation, the muscles performing movements they had practiced hundreds of times while cutting cottonwood, the brain no longer requiring feedback from nerves that had gone silent. A gust struck the cliff face. Edith felt her body lift from the ledge, her boots losing contact with the rock. For a fraction of a second, she was airborne, her weight carried by wind rather than stone. Then a hand closed around the back of her coat. Silas. Standing on one good leg, his injured knee locked straight, his arm extended to its full reach. He pulled her back against the rock. That's enough. Edith looked at the cleared opening. The fissure was open. Warm air rose from the cave below in a steady column that melted the snow around the edges of the gap. The chimney would draw, the heater would function. The cave would hold. They started down. Every step took longer than the climb. Silas moved sideways along the ledge, his weight on his right leg, his left held stiff, his hand gripping Edith's shoulder. She guided him by feel, her palm against the wall, her boots testing each foothold before committing weight. The wind pushed against their backs, trying to peel them from the cliff face the way it peeled snow from exposed ground. The buffalo hide appeared suddenly in front of them, a dark rectangle in the white, the only visible boundary between the storm, the shelter. Josie pulled it open from inside. They fell through the opening together, collapsing onto the cave floor in a tangle of coats, snow, rope, exhaustion. Edith dropped the hide. She leaned against the wall. For several seconds, nobody moved. The cave was quiet except for 3 sets of lungs, pulling air too quickly. The sound of bodies demand oxygen after minutes of exertion in conditions that taxed every system the human body possessed. Then Josie crawled toward her father. You said 20 feet. Silas looked at Edith. Something passed between them, not humor, not relief, something heavier. The shared recognition of a distance that had felt infinite despite its brevity. Felt longer. Edith checked his knee. Swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the joint hot beneath the wet cloth of his trousers. Not broken, the bones aligned when she pressed gently along the kneecap, but badly damaged, the ligaments stretched or torn by the impact against the limestone shelf. She wrapped it tightly with strips of cloth, layered over padding made from dry grass, the binding firm enough to immobilize the joint without cutting off blood flow. Then she knelt beside the firebox. She arranged bark, thin sticks, struck her 5th match. The flame caught. Smoke rose into the first channel, moved through the turn, entered the second channel, continued upward through the chimney passage. No hesitation. No return. The draft pulled clean, the cleared fissure above drawing air through the entire system with the steady, silent efficiency of lungs filling with breath. Warmth began its slow migration into stone. Edith sat beside the firebox. Her hands shook badly enough that she had to hold the tin cup with both palms wrapped around it. Josie noticed. She did not speak. She simply took the blanket from her own shoulders, placed it around Edith's. The gesture carried no ceremony. It carried the weight of something that did not require words, the recognition that the woman who had built the shelter, who had saved Josie's life, who had climbed a cliff face in a blizzard to clear a chimney, was also a person whose body could reach its limits. Strength was not infinite. It was renewable, but only if someone noticed when it needed renewal. The storm continued through that night, then through the next morning. The three of them stopped measuring time by daylight. They measured it by fires. One burned, then another. Edith stretched each load of wood farther than the one before it. She waited until the outer stone cooled beneath her palm before lighting the next fire. They ate small portions. They slept close to the masonry. Silas woke twice because of his knee. Josie woke whenever the wind struck the entrance hard enough to shake the timber brace. Edith barely slept at all. Late on the third day, the cave became strangely quiet. Edith opened her eyes. No roar outside, no snow scratching against the hide. She stood, pulled the covering aside. Morning light poured through a narrow gap above the drift, blue sky. The first blue she had seen in days. The color struck her with a physical force, as though her eyes had forgotten what blue looked like, as though the color had to reintroduce itself to a visual system that had been processing nothing except gray-white, the warm amber glow of firelight, for an unbroken span of time. The three of them dug for nearly an hour. When the opening finally cleared enough to crawl through, Silas went first, pushing himself up through the gap with his arms, dragging his injured leg behind him. He stood outside on one good leg, leaning against the cliff face, looking across the basin. The world had been remade. Fences had vanished beneath white. Sagebrush showed only its topmost branches, dark tips protruding from the snow like the fingers of buried hands. The creek bottom was invisible. The cottonwood grove appeared as a collection of dark vertical lines growing from a white surface that extended in every direction without interruption. Josie climbed out behind Silas. Then Edith. The cold struck hard. The temperature remained well below freezing, but the wind was gone. Sound traveled differently in still air. Edith could hear a crow calling from somewhere across the basin, its voice carrying with the clarity of a bell struck in an empty room. Far across the basin, smoke rose from several chimneys. Thin columns, gray against the blue sky, each one proof that a family had survived. Edith counted them. 5, 6, one chimney produced no smoke, the homestead on the Muscle Shell. The cabin where Harlan Whitmore had moved his family into Edith's cupboards, onto Edith's bed, beside Edith's stove, the stove that was no longer burning. Silas followed her gaze. That your old house? No smoke. Edith went back inside the cave. She picked up the hatchet. Josie stood near the entrance, her weight on her good foot, the buffalo coat hanging past her knees. She looked at Edith with an expression that Edith recognized because she had worn it herself, years ago, when she had watched her father help a neighbor who had cheated him repair a collapsed wall. The expression of someone watching mercy being extended to a person who had not earned it, trying to understand why they put you out. Edith pulled on her gloves. The leather was stiff, cracked across the knuckles, where she had split them during the first days of construction. That doesn't change the temperature. Silas said nothing after that. He caught her arm as she moved toward the entrance. Not to stop her. To hand her something, the buffalo coat. She looked at it. She looked at him standing in his wool shirt, his injured leg, his bare head where his hat had been lost on the ridge. Take it, I've got the heater. Edith took the coat. It smelled of horse sweat, wood smoke, snow. It smelled like labor performed in weather that did not care whether you finished. She took Silas's horse. They descended the ridge trail slowly, the horse picking its way through drifts that reached its belly. The trip across the basin took nearly 2 hours. Edith navigated by chimney tops, visible above the snow, the smoking ones as reference points, then the one that did not smoke. The cabin chimney, cold dead. When she reached the homestead, snow stood almost level with the lower windows. The door faced north. A drift had packed against it to a height of 4 feet. Edith climbed down from the horse, tied the reins to a fence post that protruded 6 inches above the snow, the only visible part of a fence she had helped Thomas build 3 summers ago. She pushed against the door. Blocked. She dug with her hands with the hatchet, clearing enough snow to force the door inward. The smell told Edith the fire had been dead for hours. Cold ash. Cold iron. The particular mustiness of a room where human bodies had been breathing without ventilation. The air thickened with moisture, carbon dioxide, the slow accumulation of biological desperation. Harlan sat on the floor beside the stove with his youngest boy wrapped against his chest. The boy's face pressed against Harlan's shirt. His eyes were closed. Harlan's arms formed a circle around the child, locked at the wrists, the grip of a man holding the only warm thing he could find. Delia lay beneath quilts near the far wall. 2 small girls lay beside her, their faces barely visible above the quilts' edges. Everyone was awake, barely. Their eyes moved toward Edith with the slow tracking of people whose bodies had begun conserving energy for only the most essential functions. Breathing. Blinking. Watching the door they had stopped believing would open. Harlan looked at Edith as though the storm had returned someone he had already buried in his mind. Our wood ran out yesterday. Edith glanced toward the wood box beside the stove. Empty chair legs had been cut apart for kindling, One kitchen stool was missing entirely. The stovepipe was cold to the touch. How long since the last fire? Before midnight. Edith touched the boy's hand where it rested against Harlan's chest, cold, still flexible. The joints moved when she pressed them, not frozen, not yet. She looked at the horse through the open door. One horse, 6 people. 2 miles of chest-deep snow. Get them moving. Harlan stared at her, where Edith pulled one of the quilts from the floor, wrapped it around Delia's shoulders. My place. Harlan's mouth opened. Nothing emerged. The word my hung in the air between them, occupying the exact space where 1 week earlier he had stood while his wife placed dishes inside Edith's cupboard. My place. The cave, the hollow in the limestone ridge. Edith pointed toward the door. Move. They made 2 trips. The first carried Delia, the 2 girls bundled in quilts on the horse's back with Edith walking beside them. The second carried Harlan, the boy. By afternoon, 6 members of the Whitmore family sat inside the cave they had once expected to serve as proof that Edith could not survive without them. Nobody mentioned it. There was no room for speeches. Edith gave the children warm cornmeal. Silas fed the heater. Josie hung wet gloves near the warm stones, spacing so air could circulate between them. Harlan sat close to the heater wall. His hands rested flat against the warm stone. He kept studying the channels, the firebox, the clay joints, the careful architecture of a heating system built by a woman he had put outside in the snow. Near sunset he stood. He walked toward Edith. His boots were still wet. His youngest boy slept against Delia's side. I don't know what to say. Edith handed him a wooden bucket. Creek hole needs clearing. He took it, that was all. No speech. No reckoning. Just a bucket, a task. The understanding that survival required labor from every person who consumed its benefits. Harlan walked toward the entrance with the bucket in his hand, ducked through the gap, disappeared into the late afternoon light. Edith watched him go. Then she turned back to the heater, placed her palm against the warm stone. The cave held 9 people. The heater held its warmth. Outside, the strip of blue sky narrowed toward the western horizon, replaced by a new band of cloud advancing from the north. Another front, the basin was not finished with them yet. The second storm lasted 2 days. It arrived without the violence of the first, no sustained roar, no gusts that shook the timber braces. This one fell quietly, steadily, with the patience of something that intended to win by accumulation rather than force. Snow dropped straight down through windless air, building depth the way sand builds in an hourglass, grain by grain until the weight of it became the weapon. Edith managed the cave through those 2 days the way a captain manages a vessel taking water. Every hour required a decision. Every decision consumed something that could not be replaced. She rationed wood to single sticks burned at intervals. She stretched until the youngest Whitmore boy began shivering. That was her gauge, not a thermometer. A child's involuntary muscle contractions. When the boy shivered, she lit the fire. When the stone warmed enough to stop the shivering, she let it die. Harlan hauled water from the creek hole during the brief periods when visibility allowed safe passage down the ridge trail. He went without being asked, took the bucket, returned with ice-crusted hands, set the water near the heater to warm. He spoke little. The silence that had replaced his earlier authority was not sullenness. It was the quiet of a man performing an inventory of his own failures. Delia cared for the children. She kept them close to the heater wall, told them stories in a low voice about a farm somewhere in Missouri, a place with apple trees, a dog named Captain, summer evenings when fireflies rose from the tall grass behind the barn. The children listened the way. Children listened to descriptions of places they have never been, with trust that the place existed, patience for the details, no questions about when they might see it. Josie took over the ventilation channel. She adjusted the cloth filter based on the fire stage, opening it wider during burns, tightening it during cooling periods. She did this without instruction. She had internalized the rhythm during the first storm, watching Edith, listening to the draft's pitch. Now she performed the adjustments with the confidence of someone who understood the principle beneath the procedure. Silas sat against the rear wall with his knee elevated on a folded quilt. He could stand briefly. He could not walk the ridge trail. He occupied himself by sorting the remaining wood supply by diameter, moisture content, placing the driest pieces closest to the firebox, stacking the damper pieces farther back where the heater's ambient warmth would draw moisture from the grain before they were needed. 9 people, 1 heater. The arithmetic should have broken them. It did not, because Edith refused to let the arithmetic become the story. The story was the next fire, the next meal, the next hour survived. She kept the narrative small. She kept it immediate. On the evening of the first day, with 9 people in the cave, Delia pulled Edith aside. She spoke quietly, her back to Harlan, her voice pitched low enough that the children could not hear. There's something you should know before the roads open. Edith looked at her. Delia's face had changed during the days inside the cave. The cold superiority she had worn while placing dishes inside Edith's cupboard had been replaced by something rawer. Cleet Purdy paid Harlan $50 to take the homestead. The cave went silent, not the silence of the storm's pause. The silence that follows a confession when the air itself seems to hold its breath waiting for the consequence. It wasn't about the family claim. It wasn't about Harlan's right as older brother. Purdy found Harlan in Miles City. Told him the homestead claim had a defect. Thomas never filed the transfer. Told him the land was worth 10 times what it looked like because the limestone ridge held mineral value. Offered Harlan $50 to occupy the cabin, establish presence, force Edith out. Once Edith was gone, Purdy would file on the ridge, then buy the homestead claim from Harlan at a price Harlan thought was generous. $200 for the whole property. Delia's hands were folded in her lap. She looked at them rather than at Edith. Harlan thought he was being smart. He thought he was providing for his family. He didn't understand that Purdy was buying the land for a fraction of what the limestone was worth. The stone in this ridge, Purdy told the clerk, it had commercial value, building stone, foundation stone, worth more per acre than cattle range. Edith listened without expression. The information arranged itself inside her mind, the way stones arranged themselves inside a wall, each piece fitting against the next, filling gaps, creating a structure that held weight. Cleet Purdy had not stumbled upon the Whitmore claim by accident. He had researched it. He had identified the defect in the paperwork. He had found the dead husband's brother, offered him money, used him as a tool to remove Edith from the property. So the real prize, the ridge, the limestone, the commercial stone that builders across Montana territory would pay real money for, could be acquired through a filing that cost nothing more than a clerk's fee. How much is the stone worth? Delia shook her head. Purdy didn't say a number, but he talked about it the way men talk about gold, quietly, with their eyes moving. Edith looked at the notebook resting on the stone shelf. The survey numbers her father had recorded now carried weight beyond the legal. Her father had been a stonemason. He had spent his life working with stone. The possibility that he had recognized the quality of the ridge's limestone, that he had deliberately included it within the claim boundary, that possibility changed the notebook from a piece of evidence into something closer to an inheritance. On the morning of the 6th day since Edith had left the homestead, though the count had become uncertain, days blurring into the gray intervals between storms, the sky cleared for the final time. This clearing felt different from the first. The blue was deeper. The sunlight carried actual warmth, thin but present, the first warmth from the sky that Edith had felt since before the storms began. She stood at the entrance, squinting against the glare. No wind, no approaching cloud banks along the northern horizon. The snowy mountains were visible again, white summits sharp against the blue, their edges clean. The basin was waking up. People were digging out, rebuilding fires, checking livestock. The road to Roundup remained buried. But the snow had settled, compressed by its own weight into a surface that could support a horse if the rider chose the route carefully, following the high ground where wind had scoured the drifts thinner. Edith turned back inside. The road will be passable by tomorrow. Silas understood what she meant. Not the road for supplies, the road to the county seat, to the survey records. How many days left on his filing? 50. Maybe 49, I've lost count. Hatch's office is in White Sulphur Springs. 40 miles from here, maybe more through the drifts. I know how far it is. Josie stood near the heater. The filing was made in Roundup. But the survey records are at the county seat? Silas nodded. Roundup handles filings. White Sulphur Springs holds the original surveys. Different offices, different clerks. Purdy filed where it was convenient. The proof against him is where it's not. Edith pulled the notebook from inside her coat. I'll leave at first light. Harlan had been standing near the entrance, looking out across the basin toward the homestead. He turned at Edith's words. You're riding 40 miles through snowdrifts to file a claim dispute. I'm riding 40 miles to prove the claim was never yours to give away. The sentence crossed the space between them like a blade laid flat on a table, not pointed at anyone, simply present. Harlan looked at the cave walls, the heater, the 9 people who had survived inside a shelter built by the woman he had dispossessed. He did not argue. He did not offer to go in her place. Edith rode out at dawn. Silas's horse carried her west along the high ground above the mussel shell, following the wind-scored ridgeline where the snow lay thinnest. The air was still cold enough that her breath crystallized on her scarf within minutes. The buffalo coat held the cold at bay. Beneath it, the notebook lay against her ribs. The ride took a full day. She arrived after dark, the horse exhausted. White Sulphur Springs in winter was a collection of dark buildings separated by white streets, smoke rising from every chimney, lamplight visible through frosted windows. The county courthouse stood near the center of town, a 2-story wooden structure with a sign above the door that read Meager County Land Office, Judge O'Hatch. Edith tied the horse to the rail. She climbed the steps. The door was locked. She knocked, no answer. She knocked again, harder. A lamp appeared in the upper window. A minute later, the door opened. Judge Orrin Hatch stood in the doorway wearing a wool robe over his nightclothes, a lamp held at shoulder height, his white hair uncombed. He was near 60, thin. His face had the angular structure of someone who had spent decades making decisions that cost other people money, sleep, property. The office opens at 8. I can't wait until 8. Hatch studied her. His gaze moved from her windburned face to the buffalo coat, oversized on her frame, crusted with ice along the collar, to her boots caked with snow melting onto his threshold, to her hands split across the knuckles, wrapped in strips of cloth. You rode here today, from the flat willow basin. That's 40 miles, I'm aware of the distance. Something shifted in Hatch's expression. The irritation did not disappear, but it made room for something else. He stepped aside. Come in. The office occupied the ground floor. A cast iron stove burned in the corner, its heat filling the room with a warmth that struck Edith's face like a physical force. She stood near the stove for a moment, allowing the heat to reach her hands. They shook. She could not control the shaking. Her body was releasing tension it had held for days. Hatch sat behind his desk. He waited while she warmed her hands, removed the buffalo coat. Then she reached inside her own coat, pulled out the notebook, placed it on his desk. My name is Edith Whitmore. My husband Thomas Whitmore held a homestead claim in the Flat Willow Basin. He died last spring. The claim was never transferred to my name. My husband's brother Harlan occupied the homestead 6 days ago using the untransferred claim as justification. A land speculator named Cleet Purdy paid Harlan to do it. Purdy has since filed a mineral claim on the limestone ridge adjacent to the homestead. The ridge is within the boundary of the original claim filed by my father before Thomas took possession. She opened the notebook to the survey page, pushed it across the desk. My father recorded these survey marks. Section 14, Township 12 North, Range 27 East. The boundary includes the ridge. Hatch pulled the notebook toward him. He adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles, tilted the page toward the lamplight. His eyes moved across the numbers with the practiced speed of a man who had read thousands of survey notations. Your father's name? Samuel Drennan. He came to Montana Territory in 1875. Filed the original claim in 1876 before transferring it to Thomas when Thomas married me. Hatch looked up. His expression had sharpened. Samuel Drennan, the stonemason. You knew him. He built my wine cellar. Spring of 1877. Best stonework I've seen west of the Mississippi. He spent 3 weeks on it. Charged me $12. I told him it was worth $50. He told me the stone was worth more than the labor, which was his way of saying I should be grateful the ridge existed. Hatch paused. He mentioned the ridge specifically. Said the limestone was the finest building stone in central Montana. Edith sat down in the chair across from the desk. Her legs had carried her as far as they could. He knew what the stone was worth. He knew what everything was worth. Stone, time, labor, distance. He measured the world the way most men breathe, constantly without thinking about it, because the alternative was suffocation. Hatch turned back to the notebook. These survey marks. If they match my records, the original claim includes the ridge. Purdy's filing would be on land already claimed. Do they match? Hatch stood. He crossed to a large cabinet against the wall, opened it, pulled out a leather-bound ledger thick enough to serve as a doorstop. He carried it to the desk, turned pages with careful movements. Each page contained survey notations, boundary descriptions, claim numbers, dates, signature. He found the entry. Edith watched his finger stop on the page. His eyes moved between the ledger, the notebook, back to the ledger, back to the notebook. Section 14, Township 12 North, Range 27 East. He read the boundary description aloud, his voice taking on the flat, precise cadence of legal language. The description ran from the creek to the ridgeline. It included the homestead, the creek bottom, the cottonwood grove, the entire limestone formation. The boundaries match. Edith exhaled. The breath left her body carrying something she had held since the moment she opened the notebook inside the cave. Not hope, something heavier. The weight of uncertainty. It dissolved into the warm air of the office. There's more, Hatch continued. He turned another page. Your father filed an amendment in 1877, after he built my cellar. The amendment added a mineral notation to the claim. He identified the limestone ridge as containing commercial-grade building stone. Under territorial mineral law, that notation gives the claim holder or their legal successor exclusive rights to the stone. Edith stared at the ledger. Her father had not simply drawn a boundary. He had filed a mineral claim. He had protected the stone. He had done it in 1877, 6 years before Edith sat in this office. 8 years before Cleet Purdy rode into the Flat Willow Basin with his measuring rope. Purdy's filing. Invalid. Filed on claimed land with an existing mineral notation. I'll void it in the morning. Hatch closed the ledger. The homestead claim needs to be transferred into your name. As Thomas's surviving spouse, you have priority. I can process the transfer tomorrow. Both claims. The homestead, the mineral rights, both. Edith picked up the notebook. She held it in both hands, feeling the weight of it. Her father's handwriting filled these pages. His knowledge, his measurements, his understanding of stone, of heat, of the value hidden inside rock that other men walked across without looking down. My father never told me about the mineral filing. Hatch removed his spectacles, cleaned them with the edge of his robe. Samuel Drennan was not a man who advertised his preparations. He built things to last. He filed papers to hold. He trusted that the people who came after him would find what he left. Edith closed the notebook. She placed it inside her coat, where it had rested through the storms, through the burns, through the nights when the distance between surrender had been measured in the warmth of stone she had learned to shape, from the same hands that had written these pages. She slept in Hatch's office that night, on a bench near the stove, wrapped in the buffalo coat. She slept without dreams. The first dreamless sleep she had experienced since Thomas died. In the morning, Hatch processed the paperwork. The transfer took less than an hour. Edith signed her name on 3 documents. Each signature felt like placing a stone in a walled, deliberate, permanent load-bearing. When she finished, Hatch stamped the papers, filed them in the ledger, handed Edith certified copies. Cleet Purdy will contest this. Let him. He has money. Money buys lawyers. Lawyers buy time. Time is the one thing I've proven I can outlast. Hatch looked at her. A brief smile crossed his face, restrained. The smile of a man who had spent 30 years watching people fight over land without understanding what the land was worth. Your father would have said something like that. My father would have said it better. He would have said it with his hands in the stone. Edith rode back to the flat willow basin the following day. The return trip was easier. The snow had settled further, the trail more visible. The horse rested from a night in Hatch's stable. She reached the ridge by late afternoon. Smoke drifted from the chimney fissure, a thin gray thread against the winter sky. Someone had kept the heater burning while she was gone. She climbed the trail. Josie met her at the entrance. The girl's face had healed from the frostbite. Her cheeks carried color. Her right hand moved with only a slight stiffness in the 2 smallest fingers. She took the horse's reins without being asked. Inside, the cave had changed during Edith's absence. Silas had directed Harlan in reinforcing the entrance wall. 3 additional courses of stone stood above the original construction. The hide covering had been supplemented with a second layer, a horse blanket from Silas's supplies. The interior felt warmer, more enclosed. Harlan sat near the heater. He stood when Edith entered. He looked at her face. Whatever he saw there told him what he needed to know. Edith pulled the certified copies from inside her coat. She held them. The original claim includes the ridge. My father filed a mineral notation in 1877. Judge Hatch voided Purdy's filing this morning. The homestead transfer is complete. Both claims are in my name. Nobody spoke. The words occupied the space the way the heater's warmth occupied it, slowly, thoroughly, reaching every surface. Silas broke the silence. Purdy won't accept it quietly. Purdy accepted a filing he knew was fraudulent. When Hatch publishes the voiding in the county record, every landman in central Montana will know Cleet Purdy tried to file on claimed ground with an existing mineral notation. His reputation is more fragile than his claim. Delia looked at Harlan. Harlan looked at the floor. The $50 Purdy had paid him money that had seemed like provision, like smart dealing now revealed itself as the price of being used. Purdy had paid Harlan to be the instrument of Edith's removal, knowing the removal would create the vacancy Purdy needed for his own claim. Harlan had been the crowbar. Purdy had been the hand holding it. Edith watched Harlan process this understanding. She did not help him through it. She did not offer the comfort of shared blame. Harlan had made his choice. The consequences were his to carry. 3 days later, the road to Roundup opened. A rider from town brought word that Cleet Purdy had left the basin. He had packed his surveying equipment, loaded his horse, ridden east toward Miles City without stopping at any homestead. Judge Hatch's voiding notice had been posted at the Roundup land office. Purdy's name appeared on it in clear script, alongside the notation, filing rejected prior claim with mineral notation extant. See Meagher County Record, Book 4, page 117. The notice accomplished what confrontation could not. It placed Purdy's failure into the permanent record, where it would remain long after the snow melted. The storms were forgotten. The details of the winter blurred into the general memory of a hard season survived. People began arriving at the cave within the week. Some came because they had heard about Silas Fenn, carrying his frostbitten daughter through a blizzard to a cave in the ridge. Others came because they had heard the Whitmore family was alive, the family that had run out of wood, rescued by the woman they had displaced. Most came because they wanted to see the cave itself. Edith let them in one at a time. They touched the warm stone of the heater. They studied the narrow entrance, the south-facing opening, the thick limestone walls. They looked at the channels inside the masonry, the firebox, the chimney passage leading to the natural fissure above. They asked questions. How hot did the stone get? How long did it hold? How much wood did a single firing consume? Could the same design work inside a cabin? Could it work inside a barn? Could it work inside the schoolhouse in Roundup, which burned through 4 cords of pine every month from November to March? Edith answered every question with the precision her father would have used: specific measurements, specific materials, specific warnings about channel width, clay composition, stone selection. She drew diagrams in the dirt floor of the cave using a stick the way her father had used pencil on paper. Each diagram was erased by the next visitor's boots. She drew them again. The knowledge was not diminished by repetition. It was strengthened by it. By March, Edith had helped build 3 smaller masonry heaters in homesteads across the basin. She rode to each site on Silas's horse, carrying the notebook, carrying clay samples, carrying the hatchet. Each construction took 4 to 5 days. She taught the homesteaders how to select stone, mix clay, build the firebox, angle the channels, test the draft by watching smoke, judge temperature by touch, calculate burn cycles based on room size, wall thickness, the number of people who would sleep inside. She did not charge money. She accepted payment in materials: stone, clay, timber, or in food, tools, labor exchanged. The economy of the basin adjusted to accommodate a woman whose skills had no precedent in the community's experience. By April, there were 7 heaters, 7 families heating their homes with stone masses that burned a third of the wood their fireplaces had consumed. Silas Fenn's ranch became the unofficial supply depot. He hauled stone from the ridge in his wagon, selecting pieces Edith had marked with chalk, the flattest, the most uniform. His knee healed slowly, a permanent stiffness settling into the joint that would remain for the rest of his life. A souvenir of the night he had climbed a cliff face in a blizzard to clear a chimney for a woman he barely knew. He did not complain about it. He called it his weather gauge. When the knee ached, a storm was coming. When it eased, fair weather followed. Josie spent more time at the cave than at the ranch. She arrived most mornings carrying a notebook of her own, a blank ledger Silas had bought for her in Roundup, its pages filling with drawings, measurements, observations recorded in a hand that grew more precise with each entry. She studied Edith's heater the way a medical student studies anatomy, learning the relationship between each component, understanding how the failure of one element affected every other. She learned to mix clay by feel, judging moisture content by the way the mixture held its shape when squeezed. She learned to select stone by tapping it with a hammer, listening for the clear ring that indicated density versus the dull thud that indicated hidden fracture planes. She learned to read smoke the way her father read cattle, watching its color, its speed, its direction for signs of trouble invisible to anyone who had not been taught what to look for. When spring finally reached the basin, true spring, the kind that melted snowdrifts from the top down, turning the white landscape into a patchwork of brown earth, green shoots, silver water running in every crease of the terrain, Harlan Whitmore brought Edith the corrected land papers. He came to the cave on foot. He carried the papers inside a leather folder, the same folder he had carried them in when he first arrived from Miles City. He placed the folder on Edith's table, a flat stone slab positioned near the heater, supported by 2 stacked limestone blocks. The only furniture in the cave, it held her father's notebook, a tin cup, the hatchet. The cabin is yours, always was. I brought the papers, Hatch prepared. Signed, witnessed, recorded. Edith looked at the folder. She did not open it. She looked at the sunlight entering through the stone doorway, a warm golden light that fell across the cave floor in a long rectangle, illuminating the heater, the table, the rear wall where her blanket lay folded. No. Harlan blinked. You don't want it. Edith picked up the folder. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the leather, the papers inside. A cabin, a homestead, a roof, 4 walls, a floor, a stove, a bed. Everything she had lost when Harlan arrived with his wagons, his claim, his brother's name used as currency. She placed the folder back on the table, pushed it toward him. I already have a house. Harlan stood in the cave that his sister-in-law had built from limestone, creek clay, dead cottonwood, a hatchet. He stood beside a heater that produced warmth from stone the way his cabin stove produced warmth from iron, except the stone held its heat for hours after the fire died, while the iron went cold within 30 minutes. He stood inside a shelter that had held 9 people through the worst storm in 4 years, while his cabin, built with logs, heated with a fireplace that sent 70% of its warmth through the chimney, had failed within 5 days. He picked up the folder. He did not argue. He walked toward the entrance, ducked through the narrow opening, stepped into the spring sunlight. Edith watched him descend the trail. His shoulders were narrower than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply grown accustomed to measuring width differently. That afternoon, Josie arrived carrying her notebook. She sat beside the heater the way she always did, cross-legged, the book open on her knees, a pencil behind her ear. Edith was mixing clay for a repair to the upper firebox joint, the one that had cracked during the second storm, a hairline fracture she had been monitoring for weeks, waiting for the right conditions to fix it. "Show me." Edith looked at the girl. Josie's red hair had grown longer since the blizzard. It fell past her collar, tucked behind her ears, held back by a strip of leather tied at the nape of her neck. Her right hand moved freely now. Only the smallest finger retained any stiffness, a faint curl inward that she compensated for without thinking. Edith handed her a trowel. She showed her how to hold it, how to angle the blade against the stone surface, how to press clay into a joint with enough force to fill the gap, without enough force to squeeze the clay through the other side. Josie watched, then she tried. Her first stroke left too little clay. Her second left too much. Her third landed exactly in the seam, filling it cleanly. "You adjusted faster than I did. It took me 5 tries on my first joint. I had a teacher. You had a notebook." Something passed between them, not a word, not a gesture, something that existed in the space between two people who recognized in each other a quality the world had not yet learned to value. Competence. Quiet, specific, teachable competence. The kind that did not announce itself, did not demand recognition. The kind that simply existed inside the hands of a person who had been taught well enough to teach someone else. Outside, snowmelt ran down the canyon in silver threads, gathering in the creek below, joining the Musselshell, moving south toward the Yellowstone, toward the Missouri, toward a country that was still building itself from the labor of people whose names would never appear in the histories, written by men who had never touched stone. Edith placed Josie's hand against the warm surface of the heater. The stone held the warmth of the morning's fire, steady, patient, giving nothing to the air that the air did not need. "Feel where the heat stays." Josie closed her eyes. Her fingers spread against the limestone. Her palm pressed flat. The warmth moved through her skin, into her hand, up her wrist, toward the center of her body, the way warmth always moved inward, toward the core, toward the place where the body kept what mattered most. She nodded. Edith handed her the trowel. Josie picked up a stone from the pile Silas had hauled that morning. She turned it in her hands, testing its weight, its balance. She found the angle. She placed it. She pressed clay around its edges, firm, even complete. The stone held. Josie reached for the next one. Outside, the last of the winter drained from the flat willow basin in streams that caught the afternoon light, carrying meltwater from the mountains toward the valleys below. The limestone ridge stood above the drainage, solid, ancient, its south-facing hollow open to the sun. Smoke drifted from the fissure above the cave, thin, nearly invisible against the blue, the signature of a fire burning inside stone, producing warmth that would outlast the flame by hours, warming a space that had been carved by water, shaped by time, claimed by a stonemason's daughter, who understood that the most valuable things in the world were not the ones people fought to take from you. They were the ones you built with your own hands, from materials the earth provided, using knowledge the dead had trusted you to carry. The cave held its warmth. The ridge held its stone. The notebook held its numbers, its drawings, its single word written in dark pencil by a man who understood that some lessons could not afford to be approximate, never narrower. Josie laid the next stone. Edith watched her work. The trowel moved. The clay pressed smooth. The wall grew by one course, then another. Each stone placed was a sentence in a language older than any alphabet, spoken by hands against rock, by heat against cold, by the living against the weight of everything the world sent to bury them. The girl built, the woman watched, the heater held its warmth. Spring reached, the basin stayed. The winter that had tried to end Edith Whitmore became the winter that proved what she could build. The cave remained.